people are probably going to be late. Oh, that's interesting. So we're still seeing everyone. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. We're about to start in a few minutes. Just making sure everyone is settled. So while we're waiting, a few brief housekeeping notes. Make sure that you are muted, although the system should probably do it for you automatically. Okay, and we are about to start. So once again, welcome everyone. We're incredibly excited to launch this event. So this event, which is being recorded, by the way, is part of the Manchester Metropolitan University Arts and Humanities Engagement and Dialogue Program, which is a public engagement initiative in our faculty. This particular project is called Ahead of the AI Misinformation Curve. Let's talk visual AI literacy. And what we're doing today is focusing on understanding and promoting visual AI literacy from a range of approaches and with an incredible lineup of speakers. So the team that organized it, and we'll present ourselves shortly, is part of DISC, which is a Digital Society Research Group, coordinated by myself and Dr. Daniel Joseph. The group is home to the AI Literacies Working Initiative, which was established last year and currently is working on the development of AI literacy toolkits for policy interventions and public engagement, and also a summer school on politics of visual AI. So I'm going to briefly introduce myself before passing it to our speakers. So my name is Dr. Adi Kunzman. I'm a reader in digital politics at Manchester Metropolitan University and chair of research ethics and governance in our faculty. I researched for about over 2 decades various topics related to digital technology, society, and digital sustainability. My latest work was on smart cities and the relations between environmental and digital agendas in the UK and in Finland. And currently, I'm working on generative AI and visual political misinformation, as well as on AI and research ethics. And I run a number of initiatives, of which this is one. And I'm absolutely delighted to be working with my colleagues. So this is all from me, and it's over to our wonderful participants.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna. I'm the Communications and Partnerships Manager of Tactical Tech. I'm a journalist, but right now I'm a communications specialist. And of course, my focus now is to understand how we can use digital technologies in an ethical and responsible way. Just as a brief introduction to Tactical Tech, for those that are not familiar with our work, we are an international nonprofit organization that has been 22 years working on building the capacity of individuals, communities, and societies to understand how technologies work, what is happening behind them, what are the power structures behind them, and to empowering people to navigate this space safely. How we do that? We co-develop creative interventions like exhibitions, toolkits, any kind of resources that invite people to have conversations about these critical aspects about digital technologies, and to start actions, proactive actions that help us mitigate the different impacts, social, political, environmental impacts of digital technologies. We work with partners locally. So during the last 22 years, 23 years, we've been collaborating with 500 organizations across the world. So we talk about libraries, schools, museums, community centers that help us reach people locally. And thanks to them, we've been able to reach around 30 million people through our digital literacy initiatives. So this is it from my side.
Hey everyone, I'm Andy Dudfield, really excited to be here. I'm head of AI at an organisation called Full Facts, which are a fact checker based in the UK. Full Facts been going for about 15 years, and we believe that bad information damages people's health, it hurts society, and it can have an impact on democracy. I'm a technologist, and so my role is about thinking about how technology can help and support fact checkers. And I suppose my role is split about 50-50 between producing tools to help the process of fact checking. So help fact checkers work faster, and we produce software in full fact that's used by about 50 different fact checking organizations around the world. And then also thinking about how do we ensure that fact checks are seen by as many people as possible. And that is in the world of plumbing, effectively, to ensure that the web works in the best possible way and the content that we produce isn't just published on our site, but is beautifully structured data. I spend a lot of my time talking about how much I love metadata, to ensure that it gets out and about and is used by platforms as well. And so fact checks are seen by billions of people every year. And I'm, I guess, an avowed campaigner to ensure that good information is used as much as possible, and really excited to join in the conversation today.
Thanks, Andy. Hello, I'm Irene Picton. I'm a Senior Research Manager at the National Literacy Trust. And the National Literacy Trust has been around for about, well, more than 30 years. And very briefly, our aim is to empower people with the literacy skills that they need to succeed in life. And to do this, we work with lots of different people in lots of different ways. A lot of my work is with children, young people, teachers and parents, but others in the organisation work in communities or criminal justice settings, or with businesses and policymakers. And in my current role in the research and evaluation team, I'm usually either focusing on reading for pleasure or interactions between technology and literacy, so exploring what it means to be literate in the digital age. And that's included quite straightforward things like looking at apps to support early literacy, digital reading practices in general. But in recent years, it's increasingly been more about media, news and critical digital literacy, as these are the skills that young people need to navigate our online world. So sometimes that involves me evaluating projects that are designed to help young people learn those valuable skills. And sometimes it's research directly with children, young people and teachers, so that we can include their views and perspectives in the wider debates in this area. Our next reports, for example, are going to explore young people and teachers' use of generative AI to support literacy, with a focus on how they use it to support aspects of the reading and writing process, but also their attitudes towards this. So one thing that interests us, for example, is whether the emergence of generative AI might affect perceptions of the value of learning to write and read. Anyway, those reports should be published in the next month or a couple of months or so. What I will finish by saying is that many of the core media, news and critical digital literacy skills and mindsets that we've looked at and used in our projects over the last sort of 5-10 years, I believe remain very relevant in the age of AI. But there's also a lot I don't know. So I'm also looking forward to learning from the experts on the panel. And a big thank you to Addy and the team for organising this and including me.
Hello, everyone. I'm one of the curators of today's discussion. My name is Jessica Elias. I'm a digital semiologist and a lecturer in criminology at Manchester Metropolitan University. My work centres around investigating the intersection between digitalisation and harm production, looking to understand human-digital relations, how that relates to corporate power and state power, and ultimately developing an understanding of what the digital means for harm production and what harm production means for the digital context. My current work is focusing around visual AI harms and misinformation, and seeking to understand how that impacts human identity, agency, and autonomy through my perspective of digital semiology.
Brilliant, thank you, Jessica. Hi everyone, my name's Sam Martin. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Oxford Vaccine Group and a digital sociologist who specialises in AI literacy, big qualitative data and text and visual misinformation. So essentially, my research focuses on how we make sense of public health and technology through large-scale social data, especially during moments of crisis. I've worked with policy and public engagement projects with the Wellcome Trust, Royal Society of Anaesthetists and the Vaccine Confidence Project at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I'm currently working with MMU and developing a visual AI literacy toolkit together with Adi and Jessica, looking aimed at helping communities navigate synthetic images and visual bias in everyday media. And then outside of academia, I also create AI-assisted digital art, including collaboration with the Cincinnati Opera House on an Afrofuturist production. But this crossover between critical research and creative practice is pretty much the way that I kind of approach AI literacy. So not just asking how people are misled by synthetic media, but also looking at how cross-generational communities and artists can challenge dominant AI aesthetics and try to reclaim visual storytelling in a more ethical and imaginative way. So enough about me. Let's start with some questions. The first question that we discussed as a team to ask our experts is talking about the general power and perception in visual AI. So, for example, with the advent of advanced generative visual tools like Google's current VO3 and Mid-Journey for generating images, we're witnessing a profound shift in our visual culture. For example, with VO3, you can produce with just a prompt, highly realistic videos, complete with synchronized audio, making it increasingly challenging to distinguish between real and AI-generated content. And of course, with image visualization tools like Mid-Journey, this has also enhanced capabilities to generate hyper-realistic images at a faster pace and also potentially visual misinformation. So these developments, we're finding that they're raising critical questions about the embedded social and cultural biases within the data sets that are training these models. For example, recent studies have shown how text-to-image models can perpetuate societal stereotypes, particularly concerning gender, race, and culture. So given these advancements and concerns, what I'd like to ask the panel is, how do we navigate these blurred lines between reality and AI-generated content? What responsibilities do creators and platforms have in ensuring the authenticity or at least ethical use of things like visual AI? I guess we can start with Anna from Tactical Tech. That's okay.
Thank you, Sam. So definitely to answer that question, we need to look at the whole picture, the big picture, because before when you were interacting with an image, with a visual, what you were seeing is what you were getting, basically. There was a space for some interpretation. But right now with Gen AI, we're talking about a complete different story, of course, because this series of AI-generated tools can reproduce and mimic endless styles and aesthetics in a way that is impressive and sometimes also scary, and it's so easy and so fast. So they are being used to produce visual documentation that resembles reality in some cases, and they can be taken as an evidence, for example, or in some cases, they can be used intentionally to create confusion. And as you were saying, this visual interference, for those that are in the room and maybe they are not familiar with these terms like deep fakes and synthetic media, we're talking about that. We're talking about this kind of media that are creating and are not fact-based, but are creating through this system and these models. So thanks to these deep fakes, as maybe you have heard around, it is possible to make things look like they are real in some situations when they are not real, and you can claim that something happened or something didn't happen based on these images. And here I would like to talk about the first symptom that that has created, or that the first impact that is creating in the way how society perceives the world and how society makes decisions. And is that right now it's so difficult to identify this difference, or to identify this relationship between synthetic media on one side and fact-based media on the other side. One example of this is what happened in Spain when the floods were happening, and some people started dismissing the images of the pile cars. I don't know if you remember those images, because there was this rumor around that they were created or generated by AI. So as we see, it's not only that these kind of images, these kind of visuals are blurring this distance between reality and fake situation is also that society is starting to question the veracity of real life events. So this is very interesting, and it's one of the first symptoms that I would like to bring to the panel. The second thing, of course, we know that when we are interacting with a picture, with a video, with a visual, it's not only what is included in the image, but what lies behind it. What are the intentions? What are the politics, the ideologies, the interests of the actors that are creating these kind of visuals? This was the case before, of course. But right now, with this system of promptings, it's really easy to create images that represent, that reflect this series of ideologies, and then that can spread and disseminate very, very easily. That's, of course, something that we know is happening. And here, maybe it's important to talk about where is this coming from? Because when we talk about the stereotypes and biases, as you were mentioning, Sam, I feel there are two sources. Of course, it's the user that is prompting to create this image, and the user is bringing this series of beliefs, ideas, mindsets. But also the system, the models themselves, they also bring a series of, let's say, contamination, because contrary to what some people tend to believe, AI is not magic, of course. It's strange because we say it, but when we see the practice, it feels like people see AI as a divine gift, and we forget that there are human beings behind it, and that the creators of these tools are bringing, again, these series systems of beliefs and stereotypes and biases. So, of course, the second symptom that we're saying in the way how people understand the world is that we see how these stereotypes and distorted versions of reality are being replicated thanks to these kind of tools. Of course, we can talk about a lot of issues and concerns, ethical dilemmas that AI is bringing. Let's not talk about the environmental impact, the use of resources, water, the poorly paid labor behind the tools. So there are so many issues, but I think what we need to do as a society, and then we can talk about practical steps that can come from different sectors of society. What we really need to do as a society is to see beyond the tools, beyond the companies. We need to question the business model behind the tools, which is basically what is enabling these situations where the tools can be used to reproduce and spread misinformation, where we see how political actors are misusing these tools to intensify polarization in specific regions of the world, where we see how some companies and corporations are basically stealing data to create this kind of, to train models and basically feed the whole system. And I would like just to finish saying, and this is connected with the model and one of the elements that brings us here, we're talking about how these models are creating. And we really need to remember that the data that is used to create these models is basically used without the consent of the people. And we are talking about artists here, of course, we're talking about advocates, we're talking about the different sources of data. So besides being a tool that produces and reproduces these amazing, disturbing results, we're talking about very sophisticated plagiarism system device. And this is something that we need to go back. I probably we're going to mention it through the conversation. So to answer your question, there are specific methods that probably we're going to discuss later on in the conversation, but I think I want to start giving this big idea. We have to look at the big picture, the business models behind, how the structures, the political structures, the economic structures are getting benefits from these. And of course, we see the results in the daily lives, and we can talk about the different ethical dilemmas. But the source of everything is this structural power that we tend to forget sometimes.
Thank you, Anna. I think you brought up some really relevant points. And definitely, I think overall, by asking these necessary questions, in a way, humanity is being forced to kind of come out of its, let's say, teenage years of trusting everything that it sees. So there's this erosion of, how can I say, naivety, which I think is necessary so that we can then really look with more of a vigilance at what is presented to us and how we use that, and also start thinking about how it's produced as well. But I'll stop talking and I'll hand over to Irene, I think, for next. Thank you.
Thanks. So it's a bit of a cliche in any conversation around mis and disinformation to say it was ever thus. But yes, images have always been used to deceive, and this in itself is not a new thing. But what is new, as we've mentioned, is that pairing a message with a persuasive image has historically required some kind of specialist skill. For example, with a brush or with a camera or with software. But now you can simply instruct a generative AI tool to create whatever you want to see with a few lines of prompting. And this is quite a profound change, perhaps even on a level with, for example, the way the internet and social media suddenly allowed everyone to be a publisher. You didn't need insider knowledge, you didn't need connections, you didn't need permission of a big media organisation to share whatever you liked with a wide audience. So framing that positively, developments like this in the history of information and communication, we can often talk about as democratization of access to the tools of power and information. And as part of this, there's always a period of disruption, a period of redistribution of power. And from a literacy point of view, some form of redefinition of what it means to be literate. So focusing on visual AI, I think there's the usual opportunities to use new tools for positive goals, including more diverse images in content, increasing representation, or for negative purposes, nudifying apps, for example. Everything, of course, does build on what has gone before. So thinking about how visual AI is reshaping what we see and what we believe to be real, I'm reminded of my adolescence when all I had to contend with was sort of increasing photoshopping of images of women in magazines, like literally reshaping them to be smaller and take up less space. And while that was depressing and insidious enough, I could just stop buying women's magazines. It was a much smaller part of my world than the internet and social media are for young people today. So thinking about, we've touched on this already, but the data sets used to train AI, of course, it affects every stage of data collection, from who's collected the data up until now, who's decided what's been published and shared and what hasn't, who's interpreting and labeling the images, and so on. All of these areas and the actions within them can have a normalizing, reproducing, or amplifying effect. And I'm also reminded briefly of that study that periodically asked children to draw scientists. They've been doing it for 50 years, apparently, with fewer children drawing female than male scientists. And interestingly, while this has improved overall in the last decade, it's improved much more markedly in girls rather than in boys' drawings of scientists. And I'm not an expert in the main figures of the AI world, but it does feel to me like the term tech bros appears more often in the discourse than tech sisters. So again, this may have a perpetuating effect. Obviously, we all know as well that most data sets are controlled by and representative of the global north. Nothing new to anybody there, present a Western-centric viewpoint, while the lower paid workers in the global south find themselves in labelling workshops, often faced with tagging extremely unpleasant content, while the economic value they create benefits those with the access to AI infrastructure. And yeah, I agree with all the points made already. Serious unresolved issues around intellectual property and copyright, artists reporting their work being scraped without consent to train AI models, similar concerns among all creatives, authors and illustrators being closest to our work in the Literacy Trust. And of course, the impact of visual AI in particular on the environment, lots of debates around the degree to which that's an issue. So yes, lots of areas of concern, and I'm sure we could spend hours on that alone, but I'm going to leave it there for now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And you've raised some really good points there, especially I think in terms of the disparity between a global north and a global south. At the moment, we are starting to see that some governments in the global south are publishing their own emerging AI literacy frameworks, which I think is a good thing. And I think mainly because some AI learning models are open source. So I think if we try to kind of bridge this gap between guardrails around these AI models and get more input so that it's less biased in terms of the training and the outputs as well. I think this might help. And just a little point, what you were saying about girls versus boys and doing male and female scientists. I even had a thing with ChatGPT where I've been speaking to it for months. It knew exactly who I was, everything that was about me, that I am female as well. But then when I asked it to do an image of me, it said, and I said, do it as Dr. Sam Martin, it immediately did a man. And I thought, my goodness, I feel betrayed. Like, do you not know me, this you proprietary AI? So, even with all of this training, there's still so much for it to catch up on. And this whole kind of tech bros culture, I think, really needs to be pushed as well. Okay, thank you very much. And let's go to Andy now. Let's hear what you think.
Sure, thanks. I'll keep it brief. We've got quite a big scope to get through, but I think the only things I would add to many plus ones to what's been there before is I'm just very interested in the commercial imperatives from some of these AI models as well. So at the moment, they're sort of an interesting shock and awe thing. There's almost a novelty to them, but at some stage they're going to need to make money. And I think there's an element of what does this mean when we start advertising things? What happens when you ask it to draw a generic restaurant and it draws a McDonald's or what have you? Like there's an element where we've got to think about what is the outcome of commercialization of these things. And I think secondly, building on the point you made there, Sam, which was I think really insightful, how personalized these experiences will become. So the difference between what you ask for and what I ask for, what anybody else asks for, will give something that becomes based on our previous histories, will be given more and more, in theory, personalized view of the world. And that can lead, I think, to some challenges around kind of shared definitions, collective truth, collective fact becomes much more troubling when we're all having our own personalized interactions. And I think, as mentioned across by all of us here, I suppose, the AI literacy, media literacy point really feels so vital in this conversation at this point as well, of we're all dropping in terms to this conversation that are currently ill-defined, or are being defined at the moment, or what they mean is changing very, very rapidly. And I think that kind of cross-sector initiative to standardize around these things, provide the scaffolding and ensure that that's in place to make sure people are empowered to make the most of these technologies that are rapidly evolving and often being introduced to people whether they like it or not, is going to become so prescient and possibly already is. So I think it's good to see that as a through line through this as well.
Thank you, Andy. Some really, really good points. And I think we're actually going to pick up on a few of them in the later questions, especially in terms of personalization. I think this will probably also have an effect on using AI tools to teach children as well, where they don't have that kind of collective collaboration between their peers and a human teacher, but they're having these personalized experiences that then may not help them going on into jobs and collaborating in teams later in life. But I'll stop there and I'll move on to the next panel question. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So given the name of this talk and the very sort of motivation to host this discussion, of course, we need to address the matter of misinformation when it comes to visual AI. So we're seeing visual AI misinformation cropping up a lot, especially when it comes to current world context, political agendas and rhetoric. And we're seeing the implications of that as well for manipulation, both of people and of the programs themselves. And ultimately, the risk of that leading to an erosion of trust within visual media as a whole. So the question for the panel is, at this point, what are the most concerning uses of visual AI for deception, misdirection, or manipulation in your minds? If I can come to Andy first.
Great, big old question there. Thank you. So, I mean, I think there are a huge amount of things inside that. So, one of the things that we always talk about in the world of fact checking is how does something make you feel? That's the first question we'll always ask somebody when they're looking at some information online, because if it feels too good to be true and you can't wait to share something because it really connects to your ideology or anything like that, that is the moment where you need the greatest critical faculty. And that's really challenging because it's the moment where you're the most giddy and exciting and wanting to do something. And that has been the same for a long time. That is not an AI specific thing. That is something that has happened before. And I think based on our own work as fact checkers, we are not fact checking that much AI generated visual media at this moment. It is rising, but it's still probably 5% of the content that we're fact checking is AI visual media. And the majority of the stuff that we are seeing that is visual media is out of context images or out of context videos. Those are the things that are still the most likely outcome for us. And that would be the classics of images of war being used out of context. So from a different conflict purporting to be something, we'll see that time and time again. Sometimes, oddly, it is pictures from computer games are being used to suggest conflict. And again, that is that kind of thing that taps into that ideology of it being so good that you want to share it because it seems so picture perfect. And sometimes it can be just completely out of context things of a picture of a boat in the English Channel with a group of people in it can just be connected to a statement, and it's the veracity of the image is not the most important thing. It's just being connected to something as a signal. So there's lots of different ways the visual media can be used already, and indeed continues to be used. And I think one of the things that does with the introduction of the AI tooling is that creates more ambiguity in the system. We clearly have liar's dividend things here of plausible deniability. You know, did this happen, or that was a deep fake of me, I didn't say that, is as troubling for the information ecosystem as the creation of a deep fake that did say something. And the fact that this stuff is evolving so quickly is a challenge in the space of we have to be careful not, I think, to demonize AI as everything generated by AI is bad and everything not generated by AI is good, because there is plenty of damaging content that is real. There's plenty of really fun content that is generated by AI. And so there is a world we need to consider here. And I think we'll come on to this later around some of the recourses from platforms about things like content labeling, which just gets really difficult about how do you define the magnitude of a heavily sophisticated deep fake purporting to say something realistic from a politician that is designed specifically by a nation state to manipulate an election is potentially different to me applying a filter to a selfie to make sure that my eyes sparkle a little bit more. But we can sometimes be at risk of treating them as the same thing. So there's a subtlety that sits inside this that I think is important. And so a lot of what we're talking about in the world of fact checking comes down to harm. So how harmful is something? And at the moment, a lot of AI generated content is in the fun world of AI slop. So just kind of stuff that is generated out there and exists. And people engage with that because they love sharing it. It has on novelty at the moment. And I think we've got to be careful not to make our choices right now on things like legislation and future views based on novelty. We have to wait to see what these things turn into. And then there's definitely a lack of clarity on the motivations of people at the moment. And I think that connects to the kind of the fun that comes with this of we have tooling that's available, probably all of us on this call have on our mobile phone something possible, a tool that could create a really plausible synthetic piece of content. That is different to 5-10 years ago, where you'd need to be a large tech platform or a university with an extensive set of computing power to produce something. And so that means that people can explore and have fun, but also increasingly it is difficult to tell the difference between, I don't know, some bored teenagers in Bosnia versus a nation state trying to have an impact on something. So we've got to be aware of the fact that the democratization of tooling, which is generally a good thing, more people having access to more technology with the right caveats around that is probably good, and the confusion that can be caused. And so I think at the moment, relatively small levels of sophisticated content, a very and higher development of people expecting it's going to exist. So the idea of a deep fake is just the kind of thing that people can latch onto. That sort of science fiction but real thing is very visceral in people's minds that we need to kind of be mindful of. And that lack of clarity on the motivation of people creating things at the moment is causing sort of a perfect storm of ambiguity, which is almost creating a bigger challenge than some of the content we're seeing itself. But I could talk about this for hours and hours, so I'll open it up to everybody else.
Thank you so much. I think there were some really important points there, especially around the idea of motivations and the different subtleties and the ways that this can present itself. Again, I could talk for ages with you about this, but I will keep a lid on it for myself. If I could go to Anna next for your response.
Thank you, Jessica. So yes, connecting with what Andy was saying, what we see is that there is a growing fight from different actors that need our attention, right? And they benefit from confusion, controversy, and polarization. And I would like to mention a couple of examples of what we have researched and what we have learned so far that covers the structural angle I was mentioning before. During the last 10 years, we have been researching the influence industry. And basically what we've been doing is to understand how political groups collaborate with private companies. It can be data brokers, it can be marketing or communications agencies that have access to this data or tech-driven tools. Before, they will use certain techniques, let's say, to design targeted ads, for example, targeted strategies, in some cases also misinformation campaigns. And this was happening before these AI tools were available to everyone. But what we've seen recently is that, of course, this is a really fast, cheap way to generate different kind of content, in this case visual, that is very attractive for different sectors of society, that uses fears, uses hate, uses love in order to gain the favoritism of civil society, or maybe to focus this rejection towards the other party. So we've seen how this industry, and again, we're talking about the business models, is something that is growing, and even if it's legal, it's very difficult to categorize how ethical it is. So we're having these conversations. We are having journalists, artists working on this research worldwide, and we see it with concern that is something that is growing, and it's not basically sort of only focusing on elections and how you can we said influence, but in some cases it's manipulate people's opinions and how people are going to vote. We see this also being used by private companies that want to generate certain perceptions about societal issues. Let's talk about climate change. So we've seen how these kind of strategies, how these kind of collaborations between certain groups and companies that can produce this kind of strategies is growing. And this is something that is concerning for us. The second thing I would like to mention is related to one of our projects, which is called Supercharged by AI. And what we've seen, different elements we have explored, but there are two elements that we see are growing. The first one is how AI-generated content, specifically visuals, are supercharging scams. So before, again, scammers had certain tools and strategies to persuade the victims, but right now it's so easy to create these kind of deep fakes, voices, videos, and that's also something that we've been seeing how it grows, not as something that is localized, but something that is growing structurally. And finally, I would like to mention harassment. Harassment is one of our main concerns. We've been seeing how there is an increase in these kind of situations. For example, not consensual intimate imagery that is being created with these kind of tools. So again, this, and with, of course, we are going to talk about the positive sides, the potential, but as everything, when we talk about digital technologies, when we talk about social media in the past, when we talk about cell phones a couple of decades ago, nobody will maybe imagine that social media will become what they became these days, this space of fight, this space of polarization. So it's again on us, how as society we build this narrative and environment about around the tools we have. But yeah, definitely these are the three maybe issues that we've been working on recently and that we see as main concerns and the way how these tools are being weaponized and misused for spreading misinformation, deceiving people, and supercharging harms that existed before, but now are, of course, supercharged by these kind of technologies.
Thank you so much. It speaks so much to some of the key themes in my own work around this idea of the digital intensifying and extending pre-existing harms and circulating those within society a lot faster, so reinforcing biases and social inequalities. So some really great points there. Thank you so much. If I could hand over to Irene now.
Thank you. Yeah. Quite a lot of my work tends to focus on, I guess, the positives, like how young people are encouraged to flourish online. But yeah, so thinking about this question from that angle, we know lots of young people might use it, as Andy's already mentioned, for fun or for attention or as an art in itself. And I think it's really important to think of that side of things too. And I think Gen AI and synthetic content can support creativity. It can improve your photos and your videos, useful tool. It can create entertaining or humorous material. And it has potential applications for things like training, for health, criminal investigations. So I'm just going to prefix my kind of focus on the harms with that. Disinformation, on the other hand, obviously, whether it's textual or image-based, often has at its heart an intention to destabilise democracy, simply by creating a sense that you can't believe anything anymore, so there's no point engaging at all. And that's something that I do hear in our focus groups with young people. So we were saying at the beginning about sort of coming out of adolescence, where you trust everything. Unfortunately, a lot of the young people we speak to don't trust anything at all. It's really difficult. And it's a sense that because some things you see online are fake, you can't believe anything at all, a kind of black and white mindset. So we have to work really hard to encourage young people that there are ways of determining degrees of reliability. There are tools, there are techniques they can use. There are organisations like Full Fact who can help. And they have their own methods. And I think also, on top of that, we have language, we have terms like mainstream versus established media. That can be a really powerful way of adding to this sense, disengaging people from media that might have issues of its own, let's be, frank, but as at least usually involves something of a journalistic code and some fact-checking processes before publication. So thinking about very quickly some of the most concerning uses that I hear about in relation to our day-to-day work, I'm thinking about our Empower project, which works with girls and young women in alternative provision. A growing concern and safeguarding issue in schools is unfortunately that of deep fakes. I think Anna was saying, non-consensual intimate imagery, the growth of that is a real safeguarding issue for schools that we work with. Often these will be sexual images. They disproportionately affect women and girls. I think I read in a report, might have been the Children's Commissioner, that 99% of these sexually explicit deepfakes relate to women and girls. And a report by Internet Matters last year suggested this might be because nudifying apps often don't work on men and boys due to how they've been trained, which, if it's true, is fascinating. And goes back to some of the things we talked about earlier. And I know like I always think with this, well, how big a problem is it? And again, we've got some data from the Children's Commissioner that's found 13% of teens have had experience with a deepfake nude, whether that's seeing, receiving or sending one. And Ofcom have found that 50% of children aged 8 to 15 have seen some kind of deepfake, although that does include your funny ones, your satirical ones, and your scam adverts. And what interested me is in focus groups they did for the Children's Commissioner, some of the girls and young women described choosing to withdraw or become more reticent about participating in online life in case their images were used in this way, with one girl saying, with how good AI is getting, people seeing such an image would not know whether it's real or not. So really like straightforward way of saying this is the problem. And I've also heard on the excellent SecEd podcast, if anybody follows that, that teachers are noticing a phenomena where young people are holding up a hand in front of their face when people are taking photos to try and prevent their images being used in this way. Sounds very dystopic to me. And of course, all of this is very much about power. Last couple of points. Evidence suggests that women who experience this kind of abuse, they can suffer anxiety, PTSD, and worse. And notably, of course, women journalists and politicians will be targets. And it also echoes some of our pre-Gen AI research, in which, for example, more boys than girls tell us that their online life opens up lots of possibilities for them. That's what we want for children and young people. We want to expand their horizons, but we see this sort of imbalance. We want everybody to be able to flourish online. So the use of visual AI as a tool for kind of perpetuating or amplifying misogyny is one of the key concerns I see in my work at the moment.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important to talk about those sort of gender dynamics when it comes to technology facilitated violence and harm, especially, as everyone has mentioned, when it comes to deep fakes and sexual exploitation online. And that idea of the erosion of trust leading to apathy and disengagement, especially from political media and news media, and how that can also impact political literacy further down the line as well. I'm going to hand back over to Sam for the next question. Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jessica, and everyone as well. I think what we've been talking about leads to my next question, which goes around or targets conceptions of power and resistance. So thinking about creative resistance and how artists and people in general can try to use AI as a counter narrative to all of the things, all of the bad things that can be done. So, for example, we've touched quite a lot on how data has been harvested without consent, especially from artists, especially from journalists, from authors as well. And of course, this is gradually, I know this is one of the biggest kind of conversations online, is it's leading to a loss of jobs, especially for artists when, for example, you could ask an illustrator to create something for you, but now you go to Canva or you go to Midjourney or you go to any of the other visually creative AI tools. So in response to this, we have started to notice a growing movement of artists and activists who are exploring ways to challenge and resist dominant AI aesthetics. So some are creating works that expose the limitations and biases of AI, like you just said, Irene, in terms of holding up the hand in front of the face, or for example, showing, let's say on Instagram when they're painting something, like the brush actually moving and the cat walking across the page. So yes, this is real, or as real as it can be for now. And so what I'm interested to ask you is, how are artists and activists that you're seeing in your work resisting these dominant visual aesthetics or misuses? Let's start with Anna.
Thanks, Sam. So I would like to separate my answer into segments, let's say. When I was mentioning social media before, we always mention the fact that when that became a way to democratize these kind of platforms, it was welcomed by society. But the difference right now is that as in different sectors, not only artists, practitioners, like society is having conversations about AI. This didn't happen much when social media came out, but it's very interesting to see that at this specific moment in time, different sectors, even young people, they are very interested in understanding how AI works, what are the possibilities, the limitations, the impacts. And this is something that is pretty unique, but sometimes we believe that it is not enough. What we believe we need to do as practitioners coming from these different disciplines is to maybe start asking ourselves to what extent we're also part of, I wouldn't mention it like a problem, but somehow I feel that different sectors are falling for the hype. And I give you an example from my field, from journalism. When the business model and the political agendas of the social media platforms changed and impacted media organizations, it was a big shock, no? Like, okay, we're losing our communities. How we didn't see that this could happen? Now let's try to find other alternatives. However, it's a bit late what's happening. And we believe that in the case of AI, it is the moment right now that we need to come together to brainstorm and first to question this given, because I feel that in our sectors, we're just accepting this as a given. We have to use it because it's there. You know, it doesn't matter if it's for finances, for production of multimedia, for fact-checking. So, of course, we understand how this improves efficiency, how it improves some processes. But we are always trying to invite people to ask 2 times, like, is really needed for my organization, is really needed for my work to incorporate AI tools? Or is there something that logically we can maybe make a decision and maybe try to explore other kind of alternatives? So yeah, this is one part of the answer. I think we need to be more critical about our role and the fact that sometimes I feel, or we feel, we're just accepting this as a given. And I see how there is this urgency from different actors, including artists, including journalists, to learn. And they say, we want to learn every single tool. Please teach us how to use AI to generate writing content, multimedia, videos, pictures. But it's like we need to stop and take a break and stay back and say, okay, wait, wait. So let's think about that for a moment. This is one part of the answer. But we also seen different initiatives from activists and artists, and I would like to mention one. I don't know if I can share the link. Maybe later on we can do it when the Q&A is open. And it's this initiative by Holly Herdon. And together with other group of artists, Holly created Spawning and Have I Been Trained, which is basically a data set that allows artists to identify if their work has been used to train AI models. It's very interesting because it's not only the fact that they are tracking and they are understanding what's the extent of these training models, but they are also starting to have conversations with AI platforms that are committed to respect copyrights. So it's not only, you know, we're highlighting the problem, but we are doing something proactively. So these tools, because again, it's not like everyone is evil. There are tools that are open source. There are communities creating these alternative AI-based, AI-powered tools. How we can involve these different actors, trying to create a system that is fair, a system that is more sustainable. So there are people that are doing it right now, very early in the process, and we are really happy with that. There is another example by the median group Bitnik. They just, if you Google it, error 417, they have a call for practitioners, artists, technologies, and they want to bring these disciplines together to find and brainstorm and create together these kind of tools to resist. They call it more like tech fascism, but yeah, you can call it different ways. But the most important is that we see how these different spaces of collaboration are being creating, and this is something pretty unique, and we are very happy to see that. It's something that didn't happen in the past, and we see it now. Yeah.
I really love this. Thank you so much, Anna. And it's really good to see that artists and creators are actually thinking proactively about how to make their voices heard, but also to collaborate and even negotiate fairer treatment, I think is great. And also, just very briefly before I move on to ask Irene, I just wanted to say, I think it also necessitates organizations themselves to have more of a balance in the guides that they give, the guidelines they give to their employees. For example, with universities saying it's wonderful to learn about AI, but don't just use these tools. If there is a way that you can bring in the human to create some illustrations or work on a project for you, let's do that first before kind of jumping to AI. So let's think about using the real skills and the humanity that we have, which is still very valuable. And then let's do all these things together. So I think that's great. But I'll stop talking. I really want to hear what Irene has to say as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I love the idea of just creative resistance and counter narratives, whatever the topic is. So I love this question, but I must confess it's not an area I know very much about compared to the rest of the panel, I'm sure. So I'm just going to share a couple of quick idle thoughts. I read a thought-provoking article recently by David Reinhardt. He's a political anthropologist. And again, I can maybe share the link if we have a moment at the end. But what was really interesting is it considered the impact of machinic rather than human making of art on democratic society. And one of the things that he observed was that AI art offers the appearance of freedom and abundance while further consolidating control in the hands of those who own the means of production, not only of goods, but increasingly of culture, imagination, and language. I just found that really thought-provoking. And importantly, he also says that what he calls these soul diminishing substitutes for art could spur us to reclaim art and aesthetic sensibility from their erosion under capitalism and to refuse the billionaire controlled production of artificial culture. And I just think it's just, for me, that really resonated with me, because when Gen AI first arrived, ChatGPT, that November 22, wasn't it? On the scene, and it's that whole idea of confabulation and hallucination of information, that to me felt like it could be the final nail in the coffin of our dreams of what the internet could offer humanity. I think some of us here will remember the dawn of the internet and how we interacted with it in its early days, and really have that contrast to how it is now, as we've spoken about. But I also did wonder if it might at least offer us this hallucination-y, confabulation-y thing, another chance to emphasise the need to develop critical literacy skills suitable for the digital age. And I know in reality, most people are unlikely to resist the billionaires and check the sources of everything they hear and see, but it at least feels like another chance to encourage that deeper engagement and awareness of how your own actions are part of this reality that we've created. Last couple of bits, I'm looking forward to Mountainhead. If anybody's heard about that film, that's sounds like it perfectly captures the kind of warning that films like Don't Look Up did with the environment. So this is the aforementioned tech bros gathered in a fancy villa, unwittingly waiting for the end of the world, that their products, including visual AI, have hastened. And then on a very practical level, last point, I've heard of teachers using thoughtful prompting to ensure that any images they create for their classroom resources are representative. So, for example, they might ask an image generator for a female Ugandan climber, not a climber. So there's these small, I suppose, acts of resistance. And yeah, so you might immediately in this space, you might think of, I don't know, a big exhibition, a trendy gallery, pushes for transparency about data, open source, decentralization tools, data citizenship, all of that ilk. And they are so important. But I also think it's, from my perspective, a sort of literacy side of things, useful to consider how the philosophical polemic, the accessible Hollywood blockbuster, the daily reflective practice of those educating the next generation can help to form part of the counter narrative by reaching different audiences in different ways.
I love this, and I could talk to you about this all day, but I'm looking at the time, and so I'll be very brief and pass on to Andy. Thank you, Irene.
Such eloquence on this panel, it's unnerving. So I think just a couple of very quick things on this. I mean, I am also a hopeful person when it comes to the internet. I have this, as I'm sure many of us do, this terrifying fear of being a professional on the internet at a time where over half the world has access to the internet and all of the information of humanity, and yet somehow we've managed to make things worse. Doesn't feel great. And so I want to make sure that we hold on to that hope and we do make things better. And I just wanted to quickly mention a couple of uses of AI that we have that are sort of taking the power of these things and thinking about how they can be put into different hands. So we use in our own work, we use AI a lot, not to do fact checking. I think that would be, as technology stands at the moment, a terribly bad idea. But considering that these models have been trained on so much of the internet, they can be incredibly helpful at identifying repeats of what bad content looks like. And so we're using large language models, visual models, all sorts of things to help us identify the most harmful content to fact check. And that kind of triaging process of using this to empower a professional to be more sophisticated in what they're looking at has been really helpful to us. And we use that in some really challenging information environments. That's not just something that is used in the UK. We're speaking to some colleagues in Syria, who has been a sort of complete breakdown of the information ecosystem, who are using the AI tools we've developed to help them identify what to be fact checking, and the same across many Arabic speaking countries and across Africa, where we're doing a lot of work. And I think that's just been interesting to see what happens when you take models like this that have been trained on so much information and use that as the starter of a process for identifying where you can have the most impact as the people who are trying to make the web better. And I'll build on that as well, also use of vision language models. So using models to identify what is happening inside of visual content. And so we've been doing experiments and increasingly sophisticatedly, I think, using these models to say, process a TikTok video and turn that into text, not just in terms of what was said, not just the text on screen, but what's been inferred. What happens if someone shrugs at the end or says, if you know, or winks? How do you automate the processing of that so we don't have fact checkers looking at thousands of TikToks every day, although I'm sure they would love that, but moving to the world where we're identifying the most harmful content using a sort of a reverse engineering of how these models are being put together in the first place. And I don't say that as AI is good full stop, but I do think it's really interesting to what happens when you take these models and use them in different ways.
Thank you, Andy. You've really pulled up some quite interesting points there as well. And I think it links also to what Irene was saying in terms of being intentional about how you use AI. So thinking about intentional prompting, thinking about what it's learning, how it's learning, and the nuances in between as well. So what does it pick up on about us that is human, that can be harmful in the way that it interacts with us, but also interacts with the data? Just one quick point before I hand over, but I just wanted to say, I came across an article by Anthropic talking about its LLM model, Claude, and it said that when it starts to kind of expose that model to harm, so like images of war or really bad information or harmful information on the internet, it also has to start thinking about how it's going to protect that model from harm. So in a way, kind of stop it from ingraining negative content that might, or negative behavior that might pop out unexpectedly and harm, let's say, a young person that's asking an instant question. So there are all sorts of nuances and safeguards that I really think that needs to be addressed. But I'll stop now and thank you all for answering my questions. Let's move on to the next question.
Thanks so much. I'm going to take over, and just mindful of time. So I'm going to ask you to do really, really brief answers because we would like to have some questions for Q&A. And also, if any of the panelists have any links, please do put them in the chat, because the chat is working, all attendees can see it, and everyone is really interested. So just drop them in the chat button. So I want to come full circle from having this broad conversation about AI and visualize and think specifically about education and literacy. And as you probably know, there is a massive push now for AI literacy in education more broadly, and it mostly focuses on so-called edtech and the role of technology in learning. But I would like to direct us more specifically to visual AI and ask all the panelists, what in your view should visual AI literacy specifically focus on? And how would that look in practice? What kind of activities, how can we know if it's being effective? So we're going to go to Irene first.
Okay, so as part of our work in the media and news literacy and critical areas, started around 2017 for various reasons, but it became very clear early on that theories of critical literacy inspired by Paulo Freire back in the 70s and 80s were going to be particularly relevant to the digital age, because they encourage readers or consumers of text, images, content to take an active rather than a passive role in that activity. and essentially to question what they see, why they saw it, whose voices were heard, whose weren't, why they might react to content in a particular way based on their own background, and indeed how we all what we all choose to share might affect other people. Obviously all increasingly relevant in the digital world, and we can see lots of parallels in modern concepts such as digital citizenship. So yes, critical digital literacy is where it's at for me. It explicitly examines how power operates in digital contexts, how this shapes knowledge, identities and social relations, and seeks to develop active and informed citizens who can navigate the digital world effectively and reflectively. So I think it's got a lot of crossover with all the other literacies we're talking about. All of these things involve on a practical level, not just considering sources, although it's very important, but the wider ecosystem within which any content exists, where power resides in that ecosystem, who owns the main communication tools, what data they're trained on, and so on. And then with visual AI, I think you can consider this to describe the ability to understand and critically engage with visual images created by AI, including understanding how images are generated, their biases and limitations, potentially awareness of issues around copyright, ownership and privacy, the intentions, as we've already said, behind their generation, and of course, how to use those tools effectively and reflectively yourself. I don't think it was tricky to know what to focus on, if you like, of all of these skills, but I tend to always start with the ethical aspects. And then thinking about the tips that we've used with mis and disinformation and how they might apply well in this area. Very briefly, we ask young people to consider what they know or can find out about the person who created, published and or shared an image or video, whether the information appears elsewhere, whether anybody's fact-checked it already and how they've done that and so on. And my final point is it's one thing to build awareness and knowledge of AI tools and ways to approach critical evaluation of outputs. But for me, it's quite another to motivate people to actually bother to use this knowledge and their new skills. We know from our media and news literacy research that value for media literacy, VML, is a fundamental factor in adolescents' news literacy engagement, and relatedly interest in news is associated with behaviours linked to higher news literacy. So this is where we have to think about how to make all of these issues relevant and resonant for children and young people. And that's something I've seen done really well through co-creation of resources, Anne was speaking about earlier, and also between industry professionals and young people, and then young people training other young people and so on. So there's lots of ways to do that.
Thank you so much. That's really insightful, and it really speaks to that kind of state of overwhelm that all of you have mentioned, where we're flooded with so many images and often disengage and don't believe anything, and how really important it is not just to provide the tools for visual literacy, but actually make people want to be visual literate, which seems to be two different things. Thanks so much, Irene. And we're now moving very briefly to Andy.
Yeah, plus one to everything Irene said. I think whatever this is, it's got to be multi-sectorial. That's the only point I would make. The kind of things we're dealing with here are not necessarily a plumbing thing that you just fix by putting a new pipe in. This is like crime. It's a societal issue. If you want to reduce it, everybody's got to collaborate, and there is just simply not enough of that happening at a systematic level, I think, to make a cut through at this moment.
Fabulous. Thanks so much. And we're going to very briefly move to Anna and then wrap up to the last question.
Thanks. So I would like to bring the attention to three things. The first one, we definitely believe that co-creation is crucial. So whatever we are creating, whatever format we have in mind, it is important to involve the communities, the audiences, the different sectors. So when we're creating a tool or an exhibition for kids or for young people, we invite parents, we invite educators, teachers, and of course, young people. So definitely, this is the most important element to create different experiences that resonate with society. The second thing, creativity. A lot of people ask us why we use analog formats in our resources, and we realize that this is a way that allows us to scale what we do. And definitely we use some digital platforms. We have some apps that allow people to identify if a picture has been created with AI or not, if a picture is misleading or not, and this is fantastic. But for example, for our last exhibition, we created a book with different layers and colors to explain how stereotypes and biases work. And when we bring this book, the analog version, to the schools, you can see how people interact with this in a different way than when they used to interact with digital formats. So We like to explore creativity, of course. We work with artists, with architects, technologies, and we love analog formats because it allows us to scale. So everything that we create is Creative Commons. So that means that if we have a school in Colombia, where I'm from, that wants to host this exhibition, we send the files, they print it locally, they set their own exhibition, and voila, it's done. So of course, accessibility and scalability is something that we hope it's also like a guiding principle for critical media literacy.
Thank you so much. And I suggest we move here now to some questions from the audience. We've got about 17 minutes left, and we've got already one comment in the comments when you can see. So I'm inviting everyone on the floor to either raise your hand and ask your question, or even better if you can put it in the Q&A section and then we can read them out. So I can see there was already a first question from Matthew saying, Andy mentioned that AI-generated imagery is still a small percentage of misinformation compared to the out-of-context imagery. I'm wondering if this is because of the limitations of the current generation of technology or because existing methods are more effective. So Andy, that's over to you.
Sure. So I think it's maybe a time thing, because we are seeing like it's easier still for a lot of people to use out of context images, and that's being backed up by, we published on this last year quite a lot of research into this particular topic. I think a lot of bad information starts with a plausible piece of information, and that's that kind of reason why a lot of things kind of break through and get connected, is because you're starting from some sort of starting point of truth. And so in a sophisticated world where people are trying to manipulate, starting from a real content is actually a good tactic in some ways of spreading that information, and I expect that to stay. And also I think at the moment the sophistication of the AI models is obviously moving incredibly fast, but there is still a dominant aesthetic that a lot of people are seeing from stuff feels off. And whilst we can get maybe 3 to 5 seconds of decent looking video content, the idea of producing anything longer is still really challenging. The way that shadows will work, where the sun is, text, all of these kind of things will still fail. So if you're looking to create a campaign of bad information, starting from some good solid information is your best way at the moment, probably. And as these tools develop, I suspect we'll see changes, and I think that's why this point of literacy that comes through so much of this conversation is so important. We need to empower people before we lose the ability to trust anything.
Thank you so much. Other questions? We have some more of our own exciting questions to ask, but we wanted to give some time to people on the floor. So if nobody's coming forward in the next second, I think, Jessica, I'm going to pass over to you, but people do please think about questions and put them in the chat.
No problem. So our final question for the panel was around this idea of what do we do? I think a lot of us will sort of face this question within our research in terms of the sort of panics around different digital technologies and what we can actually do about it. So what do you think we can do in terms of working to re-establish visual trust within this context? And ultimately, what responsibilities do developers and platforms have, as well as educators, policymakers, and fact checkers? If I could go to Andy first, if that's okay.
Of course, yeah. So I think trust is obviously an incredibly important thing, and it's very easy to lose. So I would say whatever tactics we're taking here, they have to be multifaceted. Or if anybody's got the perfect single solution, I'd love to hear it, but I'm thinking we're probably not there at the moment. And I think one of the things that I think will be an important part of this is labeling. And I mean that from a point of view of visual labeling, but probably non-disclosive labeling as well. So projects like Google's SynthID, where something effectively can be embedded into text and also into images and possibly audio as well, to say that it was definitely created by a model feels really powerful to me, because that means that you have the ability to comprehensively say this image was created by AI. That doesn't necessarily change whether you should believe it or not, but that kind of scaffolding I think is important. And we see that from the other end as well, with initiatives like the Content Authenticity Initiative, the idea of baking something into content to say that it is as it was created from the camera. So those kind of bits of scaffolding that can allow us to say, okay, this came from a model, this came from a real thing, are part of the process. That doesn't necessarily get us all the way through. I shouldn't just trust something because it definitely came from the camera. Do I trust the BBC or Russia Today the same level? Probably not, but it's part of the picture. And then there is an element, as we've discussed many times here, of media literacy, of helping people understand who do we trust and where do we place that. And then I would place quite a lot of emphasis on platforms. They have a real responsibility here. People are trying to change the way that we consume information. That's a very exciting time, but we have to ensure that people feel safe, supported, and have a structure around what they're doing. And so I think we have to be a little bit careful about mandating labeling on absolutely everything to the point where it becomes just a blur of 20 different icons on every image and we've got to try and work out what's going on. That becomes difficult in itself and it just becomes something that is easy to ignore. But ensuring that some of the burden for the way that we are changing the way we're consuming information inevitably feels like it falls on platforms. And also it falls on legislation as well. I think we should not be afraid to think about what that looks like, and also to acknowledge that in the UK, current legislation doesn't really do what it needs to do in this space. There's huge gaps. Misinformation isn't really represented at all in the Online Safety Act. It's there in a very small, subtle way. And the idea of harmful content that is legal but harmful just isn't tackled in any particular way. And I think we can look at how this is working in different ways. The Digital Services Act across Europe has done this in a different way, and legislation is evolving around the world and will become a powerful lever in this. But the dynamics between government and platform are potentially some of the places where this will play out, what the dynamics of how we're consuming information. And I think we've got to think about how do we mandate transparency in this. Not everybody is going to be able to take a look at every algorithm and work out how it worked, but knowing that there's an ability to do that is important. Researcher access to data is important. Open source things are important to enable trust in systems. And also, I think platforms probably have a responsibility for funding in this space as well. We see time and time again, I would say that fact checkers, academic experts, high quality journalism is used. Wikipedia is used to produce the foundations of what is trusted and what is not in these systems, and with no financial recompense. And if that continues, there's just going to be the lack of clarity. The ability to produce good information will stop. So I think there's a real challenge here in ensuring that the ecosystem that these products are going to rely on will continue to exist long enough for it to be able to rely on them.
Thank you so much. I think it's so key to sort of highlight the platform's role in this, be this through those cases that we've seen when faced with algorithmic bias or harmful content produced by AI chatbots, and the neutralizations that we see from corporate entities saying that this is not our responsibility or it was a glitch in the system, versus sort of foregrounding their role in the creation of these and therefore the need to maintain and moderate the content that comes from them. If I could go to Irene next, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so again, plus oneing, of course, the responsibility should lie with developers to ensure their tools don't cause harm, for example, by exposing children to damaging or traumatizing content. It feels incredible that you have to say that, but we have to say it over and over again. There are loads of ways that many AI developers could theoretically aim to be more responsible. They could, prompt filters could prevent certain types of content being created. Harmful content could be removed from model training data sets. Output filters could automatically block harmful content from being generated. And also one might hope in the same way as we can use these tools to create deceptive images, as Andy was alluding to there are digital ways of uncovering that deception as well. You can embed watermarks, deep learning algorithms, you name it. But we also need to bear in mind that those don't always work very well. and yeah, it has variable success in assessing the probability of images being made by Gen AI. Also, you may have heard experts like Baroness Kidron talk about their long experience with tech companies and their attitudes. And if not, I highly recommend Tech Tantrums. It's a talk she gave with the LSE on YouTube. But in a nutshell, tech probably won't save us. And this reminds me rather of my MSc in Environment and Sustainability. This is another big theme. And I see lots of parallels between the passage of policy in that area, environmental policy, and this one, technology. You have an industry, for example, that creates wealth, but also pollution. The electorate pick it up and demand action. Then you go through a cycle of voluntary agreements, completely ineffective, regulation once it's unavoidable, and after very long delay, legislation as a very last resort. So this is why I often end up talking about education, regulation, legislation, and without in any way suggesting the responsibility lies with users to deal with the negative sides of Gen AI. Pragmatically, I think there's a lot we can and should do in education to support children and families to have more informed interactions while we wait for policy to catch up, because these things do take time. And there are lots of opportunities across the curriculum to build in teaching related to AI and visual AI literacy, not just standalone like PSHE lessons, but science, maths, art, geography, you name it, and across key stages. I see it happening now. You don't even need to use AI to teach fundamental skills, because obviously that's a concern. Some of the platforms really shouldn't be used by under 18s. And this is something that we talk to policymakers about all the time, most recently in the Curriculum and Assessment Review, which has very encouragingly said that the curriculum needs to respond to social and technological change, and they have specifically said the rise of artificial intelligence and trends in digital information demand heightened media literacy and critical thinking, as well as digital skills. So promising for those of us who have been banging on about supporting critical digital and media literacy for many years, and incumbent upon us working in this field to keep that momentum going. Final point, we can learn from other countries. Denmark, the focus is on teaching pupils to engage with visual culture as active citizens, balancing image creation, analysis and communication. Students are even expected to discuss the role of art and cultural, social, societal context, imagine. So yeah, I was also going to very briefly mention the role of school and public libraries, but I think it has been mentioned already, but the value of third spaces who can really offer dedicated space and expertise. And how we reach families too, because teachers tell me all the time that without parental buy-in or reinforcement of positive attitudes, children can adopt less critical approaches themselves.
Thank you so much. The notion around sort of policy and waiting for policy to catch up, I think, is really important. We've seen this with social media and sort of the missed opportunities within legislation to hold corporations accountable, instead adopting that sort of soft law, self-regulatory approach that just leaves a lot of those sort of processes in the hand of individual corporations, and how we're seeing that again, and as well the mention of the importance of third spaces. 100%, absolutely. I'll pass over to Anna now.
Thank you, everyone. So now I think the panelists have said everything, but of course, the responsibility comes from different places, from different actors of society. We think with concern that, of course, the main responsibility should be on the developers, but they don't have incentives to change their behaviors. And now that there is this intertwined relationship with politics, it's even more complicated to basically establish accountability that allows to improve technologies and to create technologies that are more sustainable and human and ethical. So it's sad that most of the responsibility falls then on us, the users, the consumers, the ones that are using the tools. In the sense that, of course, we have media literacy, critical media literacy, for people to understand how to use these tools in a responsible way, how, when I'm consuming these kind of images, for example, how I'm verifying and double checking, checking the context. But what we see is that we also need to be more aware of the technologies that we use and continue experimenting and supporting alternatives that are open source, that are decentralized. It's difficult, of course, because we're talking about monopolies. But the more we support these kind of technologies, and the more we support financially other technologies that are not necessarily the mainstream, we're going to have more alternatives that are hopefully more human and more centered on ethics. So this is what I would like to say. And of course, never forget that this accountability comes with these business models, and it's difficult to ask these companies to be responsible when they have a mindset of other kind of industries. So yeah, it's a challenge, but we are here together for that, right? To make it happen, to join forces, to continue the conversations, advance knowledge, continue creating these kind of tools. And this is what we have. And we are powerful, that's the thing. We cannot just assume that we lost the battle. We didn't lose the battle. Well, we are just finding different ways to resist. So I would like to finish the conversation with a positive note.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that. I love that positive note in terms of sort of speculative futures and the imaginaries of alternatives. And I think that's a really positive note for us sort of to draw the discussion to a close to. So thank you very much to all of you for your answers.
Thanks very much. And just a very quick one from me. I added a number of resources in the chat, which hopefully all of you can see, which includes a link to more events on AI and visual AI in particular that we're running in our center. Most of them are online, so all of you can join them. We've got a summer school on visual AI politics and politics of visual AI. I can see some links from our panelists, and I made the list again in case somebody forgot or didn't notice the links to the organizations from which our incredible, amazing, inspiring, fantastic speakers came from. Look them up there. Each of their website has a fantastic wealth of resources. So please do keep this conversation going. And my deepest thanks to Anna, to Andy and Irene, and of course to Jessica and Sam. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.